And here we are, Douglas v. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution. You see, Constitution Radio. Okay, so we're going to have to do some work here. I need an intro and outro like I did on the radio, but this is the first time that this program is going to play live on Rumble and YouTube. This is the show that as of last week had been on AM FM radio for 15 years. And last Saturday was our final episode on KMET 1490 AM. And so here we are. Let's go ahead and add me to the screen here. So here we are, Constitution Radio. Now, Alan, who normally joins me, is not able to make it Dennis, I'm waiting for him to join us. Hopefully he can get in here soon. I also invited the War Hamster in case he's able to join us. There's always a lot to talk about. I'm a radio guy. So if you visit my video pages looking for quick 2-minute TikTok style videos, it's probably not going to happen. I've been a radio guy, like I said, for 15 years on AM FM radio. And then I was probably about, about 5 years prior to that, I was on something called Blog Talk Radio, 2-hour-long shows. So that's what I'm used to doing. Now, the plan is I'm going to start doing short videos too. I might even start taking little bits and pieces out of these shows and making them their own videos down the road. We are still growing, changing. And here's the thing. I know that we get a good reach out there because at douglasvgibbs.com, Ask Doug, I get plenty of emails of people asking, recommending, so on and so forth. And in fact, I just got one from someone who works with Keeping the Republic. He's the author of Keeping the Republic, A Citizen's Guide for the Next 250 Years. And co-founder of a group called Act for Missouri, Michael Compton, who has asked me if he can join us on one of our programs. Absolutely. Because we just moved here, I think we're still a little small because we went from AM FM radio, where I had, with the rating systems, you don't know. So on average, an independent station has 5 to 7 live listeners. That's what the industry says is the average for an independent station. And I was on 3 independent stations before migrating everything over to online. So we could say just from that live audience, not counting any podcasting, any replays, any of that, we had over 20,000 listeners. Probably, if that's, 7,000 per, right? And I'm going to guess that we're not going to be up to 20,000 listeners for a while here. We just moved over. Not all the listeners are transferring over. A lot of it I get, a few 100,000 listeners for my videos right now. We would like to get it up to 20,000, 50,000, 100,000. Tell your friends, hit subscribe, share this, all that jazz. But we just moved this over from radio. So it's almost like starting all over again. And so I'm going to treat it, though, no differently than Constitution Radio when I was on KMET 1490 AM, Mr. Constitution Hour on KCBQ in San Diego and KPRZ in San Diego. And I'm not going to treat any different than the shows I used to be on when it came to the Zaki Radio Network, where I was on in Reno. And I was told also, I never checked it out, knew for sure, Sacramento, San Francisco. And long ago, this program, Constitution Radio, was also broadcasting in Columbus, Ohio, and Kansas City. When I moved over to KMET, that kind of changed. So once again, let's grow the audience. I'm a radio guy. I'm going to do radio shows. We might have some shorter videos coming up. We'll see. I tend to like doing things live. Chat room, if you want to chat, you want to ask a question, please do. I'm watching the chat room. I pay attention to the chat room. And also, if you chat in the chat room, if you leave comments in the chat room, not only do I see it, but it also enriches the program. Because now I don't have a call-in line like I used to on radio. Used to be able, hey, we want to call in at 951, but I gave out the number. But don't have that anymore. So Dennis, where are you, my friend? I did send the link out probably later than he expected, but he's not quite here yet. And let's see here. Yep, I don't have him yet, and he hasn't tried to contact me. So on with the show. Hopefully, Dennis is able to join us soon, because what's the right way to say this? Because he's an important part of the show. He's an important part of the program. Dennis, for those of you who are not familiar, is a longtime friend, and he was Dennis Jackson. He was executive producer of the Enemies Within film by Trevor Loudon, and that's actually how I met Trevor Loudon, was because of Dennis. So hopefully Dennis is able to join me. Hopefully, we'll see. So first topic on the table is Trump asks the United States Supreme Court to reconsider birthright decision. Now, without spending too much time on it, only because I've talked about this so much, but I know we got new listeners and you do want to hear what I've got to say. The Supreme Court decision on birthright citizenship, for lack of a better way of putting it, was flawed. Very flawed. And jeez, oh man, this is a topic I've been talking about. I mean, I talk about this in my very first book, 25 Myths of the United States Constitution, that published in 2014. So this is not just, oh, hey, Doug's talking about this new topic. I've been talking about birthright citizenship, the error of what it is. It's unconstitutional. The idea is unconstitutional on its face. I've been talking about this since before that book, 25 Myths, in 2014. The key component here is from the citizenship clause. This is what it's all about. Citizenship clause reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Citizenship clause, Amendment 14. The founding fathers wanted to make sure that there was no foreign influence. The Tories had given them a lesson in that. George Washington, in his farewell address in 1796, said this: against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. George Washington was saying, because we're a system based on liberty, because we are a free people and there's a jealousy, what he means by that is there are forces, there are tyrannical forces that don't believe freedom's a good thing, or they want to control, or whatever. And they will do what they can to destroy free systems. We know this. We're experiencing this firsthand in this country. And so over time, what has happened since the founding fathers is we had the battle with the Tories, so they came up with natural-born citizen. Natural-born citizen, both parents must be citizens at the birth of the child in order to be eligible to be president of the United States. They did that because of the Tories. Tories tended to have at least one parent that was a British subject, someone who had a parent who was still a member of the British Empire, born typically in Britain, in England. So that natural-born citizen clause for the president, and ultimately down the road, the vice president in the beginning did need to be natural born as well, but they were running for president. The second place winner was vice president. That changed with the 12th Amendment. 12th Amendment then separated the offices, their elections. So there was a presidential election and a vice presidential election. And then the very final clause or very final sentence of the 12th Amendment says that the vice president needs to be eligible to be president, even though it's a separate election. So, and so the founding fathers, they wanted to guard against divided allegiance. largely because of the Tories. So President Trump, knowing this, understanding what's going on in this country, illegal aliens coming into the country, and then dropping a baby and baby being considered a citizen, and they can't deport them because, hey, they're the parents of you want to split up the family, that garbage. You got other things going on like birthright, or not birthright, but birth tourism, where you've got someone from another country, they get a hotel in America, they drop their baby, they go back home, but that kid now is an American citizen from birthright citizenship's point of view. Birthright citizenship is a problem. So President Trump issued Executive Order 14160, which sought to end birthright citizenship for children born to illegal aliens and temporary visitors, calling their children having citizenship blatantly unconstitutional, and called it an attack on the 14th Amendment. Critics claim the order violates the citizenship clause. Oh, no, citizenship clause, if you're born in American soil, you're automatically a citizen. And then they argue that it would strip millions of Americans of their constitutional rights. And when they say strip millions of Americans, they're calling these children born on American soil to people who do not have allegiance to America, who don't have permanent residency in America, or not citizens of America, could care less about legally immigrating to America, citizens. So all these citizens are going to lose their rights. Of course, they think that our constitutional rights apply to everybody anyway. So that statement in itself kind of flies in the face of what they claim. But nonetheless, it's a part of their argument. So that case, the case regarding President Trump's executive order that basically was designed to end birthright citizenship, made its way all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And the June 30th, this is what now, a little over a week and a half ago, the United States Supreme Court ruled in favor of those who had been launching the attacks against President Trump's view of birthright citizenship. The dissenting justices, Justice Clarence Thomas being one of them, the ruling devalues citizenship, he wrote. Justice Samuel Alito took an originalist perspective, breaking down congressional testimony, law, the language of the Founding Fathers in his dissenting opinion. Trump's position not only aligns with constitutional principles, but represents a faithful execution of the Constitution's original intent. As for the accusation of stripping Americans of their constitutional rights, one's access to their natural rights depends on one's citizenship. I can no more demand my right, for example, to give you an example. See, privileges and immunities, right? You have God-given rights. Your God-given rights belong to you, but your access to those rights depend on a number of factors. One of those factors is where you live and where you're a citizen. And so I may have the right to keep and bear arms in America. I'm a citizen of America. Somebody else can't come to America and say, hey, I got the right to keep and bear arms. No, because you're not a citizen. I can't go to France, carry an armed firearm, and say, hell, no, God-given right. Keep and bear arms. France is going to be like, not in our country, you don't. Especially if you're not a citizen. So understand, when it comes to citizenship, our rights, our access to our rights depends on our citizenship. This is a huge part of this. And in order to access those rights, you have to have a connection to that country to access those rights in that country that you're claiming to be a part of, or you think you're a part of. Citizenship is not something to be handed out like Tic Tacs or Halloween candy. It has to have rules. It has to have requirements, because every country and how they handle citizenship, the benefits of citizenship, the privileges and immunities of citizenship, the access to natural rights based on the rules of that country and citizenship right? It all comes down to that. So the importance of citizenship. So Alan, who's not here with us today, he'll be here with us hopefully next week. And he says, well, parents can't give away what they don't have. So if it's a non-citizen parent, the child isn't automatically a citizen, because the parent cannot give to the child what the parent doesn't have. So that means now there has to be a legal aspect. So the question is then, is being born on American soil enough? Now, if I travel as a visitor on vacation to some other country, and my wife's pregnant, we have a kid in that other country, that kid is not going to automatically be a citizen of that country. I'm there temporarily. I'm visiting. If I am a diplomat serving at a country's embassy in some other country, and my wife has a child in that country, that child is not a citizen of that country. Why? Because the allegiance of the parents, because child's too young to make this decision. Child cannot make this decision themselves. So the parents' allegiance is going to matter. So for those born on American soil, to Americans who have legally entered the United States, they've gone through the process, said, I want to give my allegiance to America. They've naturalized, which means they renounced their old allegiances. Or you were born here, you're already a citizen, or whatever it may be, those children are citizens and they're going to enjoy, because their parents have an allegiance to America when they were born. But what about parents who have illegally entered the United States? So once again, 14th Amendment, all persons born or naturalized, right? This is a legal process, and my wife naturalized 20 years ago. And she had to renounce her old citizenship. She had to renounce being a subject to a foreign power, or being subject to a foreign power. Saying, hey, I'm American, I'm all in. She had to renounce. So all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and that word "and" means there's something in addition to. Born or naturalized in the United States is not enough. Born or naturalized in the United States is a part of the equation. 2 plus equals 4. 2 plus what equals 4? There has to be another part of the equation in order for the final answer to be satisfied. And the only answer to that one is 2 plus 2 equals 4. I don't care what your woke math teachers say. If it's 2 plus 5, it's not 4, and therefore the answer is not valid. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Born or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof equals citizenship. Born or naturalized and, there's your plus, subject to jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state and wherein they reside. The progressive interpretation originally only focused on born in the United States portion. They ignored that second half. Then when it got brought up, no, that second half has meaning, then they defined it differently. They ignored the intended definition and the equally crucial to the first half of that clause and subject to the jurisdiction thereof requirement. Originalist analysis demands we examine the original intent of the language of the citizenship clause and what it is actually meant by the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The congressional record of the time provides clear guidance. He is saying he's being blocked from joining me. Huh. All right, so hang on a second. Something All right. So Dennis has texted me. I was wondering where he was and if he was going to be able to join me. And he said he's having trouble getting in or whatever. So Dennis, real quick, I'll get back on the topic. When we were on AM/FM radio, if he had trouble with his internet connection, and sometimes he would just call in. Well, now that option is no longer there. Can't just call in. Gotta hit the link, join the show. So anyway, all right, so get back to what I was talking about. So the originalist analysis says that we need to examine the context. What it says and what you think it means is not enough. What does the language of the Citizenship Clause, when looked at through the eyes of those who wrote it? The congressional record of the time provides clear guidance. During the debates of the 14th Amendment, Senator Lyman Trumbull, principal author of the Citizenship Clause, explicitly stated, "What do you mean by subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? Not owing allegiance to anybody else. That is what it means." He further clarified that this meant complete jurisdiction, not a partial or temporary one. Similarly, Senator Jacob Howard, another key architect of the clause, explained that the provision will, quote, "will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers," unquote. These statements make clear that mere physical presence on U.S. soil was insufficient to confer citizenship. Full political allegiance was required. Understand that the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause did not emerge in a vacuum. It was directly modeled after the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which explicitly stated all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. The legislative history demonstrates that the framers of the Citizenship Clause intentionally tied citizenship to the absence of allegiance to a foreign power. Yeah, but Doug, it was made for, they didn't even care about this type of stuff. It was about the children of the newly emancipated slaves. That's true. The original writing of the clause was based on the idea that we wanted to make sure that the newly emancipated slaves and their children were considered citizens and treated as citizens. But the authors knew that this would also open up the door as a definition for citizenship. Citizenship had not been defined in the Constitution in this way up to that point. Citizenship had been discussed, it had been mentioned, it was understood, and the Immigration and Naturalization Laws, 1790, 1795 were the first two, laid out the rules for citizenship. The rules for citizenship, when it comes to the law, in Article 1, Section 8, was given to Congress. But the Constitution had not defined what it really was at that point. And you had the past cases saying, hey, we're not even going to allow this particular group not to be a citizen at all. We'll get to that, though. All of this was understood okay, he's having issues with his system. It looks like Dennis is not going to join us. Okay, so President Trump's Executive Order 14160. So unless Warhamster joins me, I'm pretty much alone today. We'll have our co-host next week, hopefully. Was firmly grounded in this existing statutory framework. As the chief executive charged with executing federal laws, President Trump, because Article 2, Section 1, very beginning, the President of the United States is vested with the executive power. Executive power is to execute the law. So understand, with this executive order, President Trump was not creating new policy. He was using the executive order to execute the long-standing requirements of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, a law, and the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause, both of which remain valid constitutional law today. No subsequent law has ever contradicted this standard. Now, the progressives point to the 1898 Supreme Court case, United States versus Wong Kim Ark, as a definitive support for their definition of universal birthright citizenship. And this case has been grossly misinterpreted. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco to Chinese parents who had secured permanent residency status prior to his birth. The court's decision hinged not merely on his birth on U.S. soil. That was his argument. When the case was going on, the argument laid out by Wong Kim Ark's team was, I was born on American soil, therefore I'm a citizen. So the case itself, the foundation of the case was, I was born on American soil, therefore I am a citizen. And that is how the progressive left looks at that case. But you have to go deeper. Once again, context. What you see on the surface is not enough. The case, he was born on American soil, but it hinged not merely on his birth on U.S. soil, but on his parents' legal permanent residency status, which satisfied the subject to the jurisdiction requirement. The court specifically recognized that the citizenship clause contains two mandatory criteria connected by the word and. We talked about it, right? And subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So first, birth in the United States. Second, and being subject to the jurisdiction. Wong Kim Ark's parents had taken the steps required to establish permanent legal residence, especially since at the time, the Chinese could not become citizens, and they were Chinese immigrants. So they did the best they could, which was permanent residency, demonstrating their allegiance to the United States rather than to China, at least from a paperwork procedural point of view. So this legal condition of permanency at the time of his birth was crucial to the court's decision. No Supreme Court case has ever held that mere birth on U.S. soil automatically confers citizenship, regardless of parents' allegiance or legal status. In fact, no country in the world does that. Or at least no court said that until the fateful decision on June 30th, 2026 of Trump v. Barbara. Despite arguments to the contrary, the Wong Kim Ark decision actually supports Trump's position by affirming that both criteria of the citizenship clause must be satisfied, and that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means more than merely being subject to the laws and residing within the borders. And see, that's the argument of the left. Oh, no, and subject to jurisdiction matters, they'll tell you. You're subject to the laws and you're inside the country. Matter of fact, Jackson tried to say something along those lines, but it was so gobbledygooked out of that made no sense. Again, it comes down to not just being born on the soil, but subject to jurisdiction, meaning more than subject to the laws. If I go to France, I'm subject to the laws because the laws are in place. I can't drive through a red light. Someone visiting this country can't drive through a red light. You're subject to that law. Can't rob somebody. You're subject to that law. But you're not subject to other laws, like serving jury duty, like being able to buy a firearm. So you don't have full jurisdiction. You have what's called legal jurisdiction. Legal jurisdiction is the basic legal format, platform, whatever of the country. But political jurisdiction, and that's what this is really about, goes deeper than that. And understand there are several Supreme Court cases that support Trump's argument regarding the interpretation of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. There's never been before this case a ruling that went against what Trump was trying to say, but there's a number of cases that support it, including Wong Kim Ark. Remember, Wong Kim Ark is being misinterpreted. Elk v. Wilkins, the court held that this is 1884, the court held that Native Americans born on tribal reservations were not automatically U.S. citizens under the 14th Amendment because they were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States at birth. They were born in America within the borders. They're subject to the laws, but their allegiance is to their tribe. The court reasoned that members of Indian tribes owe allegiance to their own tribes rather than the United States, demonstrating that mere birth on U.S. soil was insufficient without complete jurisdiction. Then you got the slaughterhouse cases in 1873. While not a direct citizenship case, the decision contains important dicta about the citizenship clause. The court noted that the phrase subject to jurisdiction thereof was added to exclude specific categories of people from automatic citizenship. The court indicated that the framers intended to exclude children of foreign diplomats and those born in hostile occupation, supporting the argument that allegiance matters. Minor versus Happersett, 1875. The court recognized that the citizenship clause contains two mandatory criteria connected by and birth in the United States and being subject to the jurisdiction. This supports the argument that both elements must be satisfied for citizenship. Whedon v. Chin Bo, 1927. This case reinforced the principle from Wong Kim Ark that the parent's status matters. The court held that a child born in the U.S. to Chinese parents who were not permanent residents was not a U.S. citizen, distinguishing the case from Wong Kim Ark. Rogers versus, and I want to say it's pronounced Belay, Bellei, 1971. Court held that the 14th Amendment's definition of citizenship does not include persons who acquired citizenship by birth abroad to a citizen parent, further emphasizing the limited scope of the citizenship clause. These cases collectively support the position that subject to the jurisdiction thereof requires more than mere physical presence on U.S. soil. It requires complete political allegiance and absence of allegiance to a foreign power. As the court noted in Elk v. Wilkins, there are different types of jurisdiction. 14th Amendment requires complete jurisdiction, not partial, not temporary jurisdiction, not just legal jurisdiction, full political, complete jurisdiction. The consistent thread through these cases is that the Supreme Court has recognized exceptions to birthright citizenship when the parents maintain allegiance to a foreign power or are not permanently domiciled in the United States. This aligns with President Trump's argument that Wong Kim Ark was decided based on the parent's permanent resident status, which satisfied the jurisdiction requirement. In regards to Elk v. Wilkins, Congress later passed a law conferring citizenship to all Indians via the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. This act, signed into law by President Calvin Coolidge on June 2nd, 1924, unilaterally conferred U.S. citizenship to all Indians, Native Americans, if you want to call them that, born in the United States. This legislation effectively attempted to circumvent the Supreme Court's ruling in Elk v. Wilkins, 1884, and its passage was constitutionally significant. What this also does is it shows us through precedent that Congress can pass a law to circumvent the Supreme Court. In Elk v. Wilkins, the court had held that Indians born on tribal reservations were not automatically U.S. citizens under the 14th Amendment because they owed immediate allegiance to their tribes and were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States at birth. The court essentially said that Congress could not grant citizenship through legislation alone to those who were not constitutionally eligible for it under the 14th Amendment. So the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, though technically unconstitutional, changed the constitutional meaning of citizenship through mere legislation. But nonetheless, this serves as an example that there's precedent and it has been accepted that Congress exceptions clause would be the constitutional support of that, by the way, in Article 3, that the Congress can say, you know what, court's wrong, and we're going to pass a law to defy it. And it's the president's job to execute that law. So rather than pursuing a constitutional amendment, which would have been the proper constitutional method to override the Elk decision, in my opinion, Congress and President Coolidge simply passed a law declaring all Indians to be citizens. Once again, this historic episode powerfully illustrates a broader argument about constitutional interpretation. It demonstrates how the legislative and executive branches sometimes act in a manner to negate the courts. Should they have used the constitutional process amendment? Sure. They used legislation, but it can be done if we follow precedent. If we say, well, there's a historical example. If Congress right now says, okay, fine, we're going to pass a law supporting Trump's executive order, and then they sue against it. Wait a second. They say, well, yeah, but judicial review, Doug, the courts can say that what Congress did was unconstitutional. No, they can't. That's not in the Constitution either. Constitution's meaning cannot be changed by legislation alone, typically. Well, typically, anytime. Constitution means says what it says. If Congress wants to have an authority, they're supposed to get it through amendment. Proper procedures need to be followed when it comes to constitutional provisions. But see, this whole mess is because we have elected officials who ignore constitutional constraints on the power in the first place. You've got the courts trying to micromanage the president. You got the Congress trying to micromanage the president. You got the president trying to dictate to the Congress. Tell the courts to take a hike, which actually kind of can do, but that's beside the point. And so we're watching this whole mess. And then when we're like, well, that person's unconstitutional. No, that person is. The whole situation is a mess from a constitutional standpoint. And it's all a perfect example of the hypocrisy. Good to see you, Silvermine, in the chat. It is a perfect example of the hypocrisy of the congressional opposition to President Trump's executive order that eliminates the unconstitutional concept of birthright citizenship. Trump's opposition claims he was acting unconstitutionally when he was in line with the founding document and with a law. They were silent when the Constitution was severely violated by laws like the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. This is not to say that I believe that Indians or Native Americans, whatever you want to use, whatever word you want to use, should suddenly be stripped of their citizenship. If that law ought to be recognized as constitutional, then there needs to be an amendment for it simply. Same goes for birthright citizenship. And thank you, Silvermine, for commenting to help boost the YouTube algorithm. All of you, take a lesson from Silvermine on that one. So once again, we went from probably about 20,000 listeners on AM/FM radio to here. We're starting all over again with this program. I'm a radio guy. I don't do itty-bitty little videos. I might in the future. This is radio on YouTube and Rumble. Anyway, get back to my point here. Thank you, Silvermine. I appreciate the comment. Paying attention for sure. So, but understand something. If the definition of citizenship ought to include just the mere birth of American soil, regardless of the allegiance of one's parents, if that's really what everybody wants, then pass an amendment that says that, because that's not what the 14th Amendment says. The true constitutional definition of the citizenship clause addresses the dangerous reality of Tories infiltrating and attempting to influence American government. The Tories served as a key reason why the founding fathers were worried about divided allegiances. And the language of the citizenship clause reflects that concern, making President Trump's interpretation of the 14th Amendment's clause regarding citizenship critical during a time when other groups also seek to infiltrate and influence America from within. The historical lesson of the Tories ought to be one recognized and adhered to, especially when one considers the national security element connected to Chinese births in the United States. Once born and assured American citizenship, these children are then returned to China to be taught anti-American ideas so that they may return to the United States later as a citizen to inject their communist poison into our system. Is that what we're wanting to open the door for? Because that's what's going to happen. The original constitutional definition of the citizenship clause was crafted to address the founding fathers' legitimate concerns about divided allegiances. The historical threat of Tories infiltrating and influencing American government directly informed the clause's language, and the children of children on American soil to Chinese nationals confirms the danger, making President Trump's interpretation of the 14th Amendment citizenship provision particularly relevant today. As other groups similarly seek to infiltrate and influence America from within, the historical lesson of the Tories remains a critical warning that should be recognized and adhered to in our modern application of constitutional principles. Now, in the chat room, Silvermine made comment, and I want to make sure I voice this so that everybody hears it, because this is on YouTube and Rumble, so I want to make sure the people on Rumble knows this too, even though Silvermine is commenting over there at YouTube. There's a great book from 1977, Government by Judiciary by Raoul Berger on the 14th Amendment. There's a number of good books about the 14th Amendment. I have not heard of that one. Thank you, Silvermine. I'll definitely take a look. I've got one by Mark Levin, Men in Black. There's one specifically about the 14th Amendment. I can't remember the author that I have. And then, of course, you could go to the Congressional Globe. The Congressional Globe is the congressional testimony. Let me rephrase that. The congressional record of that time. So the testimony, congressional testimony regarding this, the 14th Amendment, and particularly this clause, are in that record. A Congressional Globe record from May 30th, 1866, I think is where most of the language supporting what I'm saying is in, if you want to go look it up. And the Founding Fathers, see, once again, I want to go back to the founders because they understood that national security and social cohesion required undivided allegiance. Again, they were all about combating divided allegiance, divided loyalty. They learned a real hard lesson during the Revolutionary War with Benedict Arnold. His wife was a Tory. There was divided allegiance there. He got influenced by just being married to someone who was a Tory, and ultimately became a traitor. Divided allegiance was a big deal to these guys. During the Constitutional Convention, there was unanimous agreement that the president must be a natural-born citizen, a requirement so fundamental that it warranted no debate. This reflects the founders' concern that divided loyalties threatened the republic's survival. The framers of the 14th Amendment inherited this understanding. Senator Howard emphasized that the citizenship clause was designed to convey the same jurisdiction in extent and quality as applies to every citizen of the United States now, unquote. This standard cannot be met by those whose parents enter the country illegally and maintain allegiance of their home countries or to their home countries. The naturalization process further confirms this principle. I mentioned this earlier. My wife gave that oath 20 years ago. She's an immigrant. I love immigrants. I'm married to an immigrant. Those seeking to become citizens must explicitly, she did so, renounce all prior allegiances to satisfy the subject to the jurisdiction requirement. This demonstrates that allegiance, not mere geography, is the constitutional foundation of American citizenship. All right, now we have a Rumble commenter, Pug's Mom. Afternoon, Doug. I'm so glad to see you on Rumble, and what a great subject to be speaking on for your first time doing your Saturday show on Rumble and YouTube. Thank you, Pug's Mom. So we got Silvermine commenting at YouTube. We have Pug's Mom commenting at Rumble. How about you comment too? I would love to see what you have to say, folks. And we want to grow this. Once again, remember, we went from, probably, but once again, it's a guess because the Nielsen ratings never gave me exact numbers. But based on what's typical for independent stations and the number of stations I was on, blah, 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 I had anywhere from 20,000 to maybe as much as 50,000 listeners on AM and FM radio on the airwave, based on average numbers for the number of stations I was on. Here we are now on Rumble and YouTube, and we're starting from scratch, from the very beginning. Let's get it up there to 20,000, 50,000, maybe more. So make sure you subscribe, follow, whatever it is, get notifications, share, put the links out there. But remember, I'm a radio guy. So if there are people going, well, I want to watch a 2-minute video, that ain't going to happen with me. I'm a radio guy. I've been on radio for 15 years. Silvermine, the book that he or she referenced earlier from 1977 by Government by Judiciary by Raoul Berger on the 14th Amendment, argues that the U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted the 14th Amendment and the U.S. Constitution contrary to the original intent. Well worth the read. Silvermine, that is the story of America. I can't count how many times I've had people tell me, that the 14th Amendment is so flawed. There's so many problems. The 14th Amendment actually was written fine. It's the interpretation that's the problem. In the incorporation theory, the way they interpret how the Equal Protection Clause is supposed to be utilized, the Citizenship Clause, the list goes on and on and on. It was written just fine. It's the interpretation that's the problem. But that's what the left does. That's what the enemies of the Constitution does. And I shouldn't just say the left. The enemies are on both sides of the aisle. This is what they do. And it's a play with words. And that play with words happened from the very beginning. If you'll go back, once you get to know me, here's something you realize. I am not a fan of Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton this is the reason why J.D. Vance has been concerning me lately, because he's been leaning on the economic ideas of Hamilton. Not good. Alexander Hamilton was a centralized government, consolidated government, big government mind. And there's a problem there. And when he began launching his attack against Constitution, he created a political party, the Federalist Party. So when people talk about the Federalists, I have to ask, do you mean the party or real Federalists? Because a Federalist was someone who believed in the Constitution as it was written and as it was meant based on the original intent and interpretation. But Hamilton had ideas of implied law, things like that. There was nothing Federalist about him. So what better thing to do than to lie, to play games with the language and call his party the Federalist Party? But there was nothing Federalist about him. If he had been honest, it would have been the Nationalist Party. Now, at Rick Crippen in the chat room there over there at YouTube. Rick, good to see you. Rick used to be a student of mine in one of my Constitution classes down in Southern California when I still lived down there. And I would say probably 2/3 of my email list are former students from those classes. Go to douglasvgibbs.com, scroll down if you want to join the email list. Good to see you, Rick. He says, I'm still here, Doug. You can't get rid of me. I'm glad to see you're there, Rick. Good to see you, buddy. So let's get back now to what we're talking about on Birthright, because I do have some other topics I want to get to, and I want to wrap this up. And understand, right now, I haven't set this show up to have intros, outros, advertisements. I'm just going to go 2 hours. I am going to eventually integrate into it some little short breaks. I'll probably use my Socialist Borg stuff and maybe ads about my books. I don't know. We'll figure it out. This is new. We're launching this. This is like SpaceX, but it's Mr. Constitution Online, just launching new products, seeing if they can get into the air. We'll do all the fixing and the adjusting later on. So I'm glad you're all here. So the naturalization process, as I said earlier, confirms the principle that one must throw off one's allegiances somewhere else. Those seeking to become citizens must explicitly renounce all prior allegiances to satisfy subject jurisdiction. This demonstrates that allegiance, not mere geography, is the constitutional foundation of American citizenship. The Immigration and Nationality Act outlines the oath of allegiance required for naturalization. Definitely hit the like button and leave an extra comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm, folks, says Silvermine. Thank you. Thank you, Silvermine. You're exactly right. The oath specifically states that applicants must absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, and sovereignty, unquote, of which they were previously a citizen or subject. This requirement demonstrates that allegiance, not mere physical presence in the United States, is the constitutional foundation of American citizenship. The naturalization process requires individuals to formally transfer their political allegiance from their former country to the United States, satisfying the subject to the jurisdiction requirement of the 14th Amendment. The oath also includes a commitment to support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, further emphasizing the importance of complete political allegiance to the United States as a condition of citizenship. Critics question whether a president can address birthright citizenship through executive action. The president's constitutional duty is to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Article 2, Section 3. Executive Order 14160 did not create new law. It directed the executive branch to apply the existing standards of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment as originally understood. So the executive order was completely constitutional. The Constitution grants Congress authority over naturalization and migration, Article 1, Section 8 and Article 1, Section 9, but the president executes those laws. It says no law currently mandates universal birthright citizenship, regardless of parent status. Now we've got a flawed case ruling, but it's not law. Judges can't make law. Trump's executive action properly interpreted and applied the existing legal framework. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 remains valid law. And the 14th Amendment must be interpreted according to its original intent. So Trump's duty was to execute existing valid law, and that's what he was doing. President Trump has been accused by his opposition of violating the rule of law with his defiance against lower court rulings, attempting to derail the birthright citizenship executive order. Even with the ruling against him by the Supreme Court, Congress can make law to correct the judicial decision, and technically, he can tell the Supreme Court, take a hike. We're still going to operate based on what the executive order says because it's a constitutional executive order. So, whoa, wait a second. You're telling him he can disobey the court? Yes. They're not the final bosses. We are. And the exceptions clause, Article 3, Section 2, allows Congress to override unconstitutional rulings through the creation of law anyway, a tactic that may be used since the High Court erroneously failed to rule in President Trump's favor. And let's not forget that the judiciary has no constitutional authority to legislate from the bench whatsoever. They can't make law. Who can make law? Article 1, Section 1, what does it say? Excuse me, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. Article 1 vests all legislative powers to Congress, not the courts. When federal judges block Trump's executive orders, they exceed their constitutional authority by effectively rewriting policy, an action that may be corrected either by more legislation, a constitutional amendment, or by the president just standing firm. Historical precedent supports presidential defiance of judicial overreach. Thomas Jefferson twice refused to comply with court rulings he deemed unconstitutional, first by impounding funds appropriated by Congress, and second by refusing to deliver a commission after the Marbury versus Madison decision. President Andrew Jackson, father of the Democratic Party, they ought to love this if they are all about their party, similarly and famously defied the court in Worcester versus Georgia, remarking John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. These examples demonstrate that the judiciary possesses no enforcement mechanism, and that presidents have constitutional authority to resist judicial attempts to usurp executive and legislative functions. The progressive liberal left, their defense of birthright citizenship reveals more political motivations rather than constitutional principles anyway. This isn't about the Constitution with them. That's what they're using. They wrap themselves in the blanket of the Constitution. They wrap themselves in the blanket of the flag, claiming they're on the side of you. We're trying to save democracy, they'll tell you. Approximately 8% of all U.S. births in 2023 were to illegal aliens and temporary visitors. About 320,000 children annually. This practice creates powerful incentives for illegal immigration and birth tourism, particularly from countries like China, which may account for over 1 million Chinese American-born citizens currently residing abroad. What happens with China activates them and sends them back, and we go, oh, well, they're citizens, nothing we can do about it. And you got this invasion force coming in to intertwine with society and push us over the edge. But see, the Democrats, they recognize that these populations probably represent future voters. Could affect congressional apportionment based on population. The political calculus behind defending birthright citizenship is not about citizenship. It's about the electoral advantage that they think they're going to get out of it. They could care less about constitutional fidelity. From an originalist perspective, Trump's position on birthright citizenship represents the most faithful interpretation of the 14th Amendment since its ratification. His executive order aligns with the Citizenship Clause's original intent. It aligns with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It aligns with the Wong Kim Ark precedent if you properly understand it, properly dismantle it, properly get into the context. And unlike his predecessors who allowed judicial misinterpretation to stand unchallenged, Trump took decisive action to enforce the Constitution as written. In doing so, he demonstrated the kind of constitutional fidelity that places him alongside a short list of presidents who prioritized original meaning over political expediency. The progressive argument against Trump's position relies on selective reading of the text, misunderstanding of precedent, and disregard for the framers' clear intent. From an originalist standpoint, Trump's effort to end birthright citizenship for children of illegal aliens and temporary visitors isn't unconstitutional. It's constitutionally necessary. Now, since this case, after a ludicrous defiance of the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act of 1866 by the United States Supreme Court in Trump versus Barbara, which rejected President Trump's executive order 6-3, Trump is calling for the court to do something rare. He's called for them to revisit the case. President Trump was rightly infuriated by the ruling. Dissenting Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito were Infuriated. Gorsuch. The president took to a True Social to post about birth tourism facilities and how the SCOTUS decision will allow our country to become a greater victim of that giant scam. So he went on to indicate that the Supreme Court's ruling is wrong. And then he wrote, quote, I will be asking for a rehearing by the United States Supreme Court immediately. This miscarriage of justice will destroy America if we don't change their absolutely insane decision. Now, everybody seems to be under, I've talked about a few people about this before, and they seem to be under the understanding that, well, once the Supreme Court makes a decision, it's locked in stone. First of all, it's not. Remember, Roe v. Wade was invalidated recently. What was that? By Dobbs, what? Last year? Year before? When was Dobbs? I think it was last year. So first of all, a ruling can be reversed. In 2019 case, Garland versus United States, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote in his opinion that any time that a ruling or an opinion by the court is egregiously unconstitutional, it must be overturned. It must be reversed. So first of all, to say that once the Supreme Court decides something, that's just the way it is false. Secondly, there is a rule on the books that you can immediately ask for reconsideration. Now, asking for reconsideration doesn't guarantee that the High Court will actually grant the request. Supreme Court rehearings are very rare in U.S. history. But under the court's Rule 44, a rehearing request may be filed within 25 days of the judgment. The rule is intended to address exceptional circumstances, including significant legal and factual issues the court might have overlooked. The court grants few such petitions, and a rehearing cannot be ordered unless a justice who joined the majority supports it. So one of those six, remember 6-3, one of those six have to say, okay, I'm good with the rehearing. Let's do it again. Maybe John Roberts, maybe Amy Coney Barrett, probably not the other three. President Trump's response is fair considering the unknown number of foreigners from places like Russia and China who are known to make elaborate plans to be in this country when their kids are born. This is a national security issue. It's more than just immigration. Birthright citizenship is not only not protected by the Constitution, it opens the door for legalized invasion of this country. Now, the rehearing request is a long shot. It's a long shot to get the court to revisit the case. But President Trump is right to make the request. Now, I want you to understand something. We are currently under attack. This is a part of that attack. This invasion of our country using illegal immigration is just a part of it. The invasion against America goes all the way back. I mean, the historical development of socialism and communism in America is nothing new. They're using immigration as one prong of the attack. So I mentioned earlier, Dennis Jackson, who's typically on this program with me, who's having difficulties getting his system to work with this platform. See, whenever he had trouble in the past, he just called into the station and we'd get him in by phone call. More often than not, he would join the radio program on KMET 1490 AM, the station we were on last week. We are now done with. Now we're on Rumble and YouTube permanently for this particular program, Constitution Radio. And so when he had trouble getting in, he would just call in. We don't have a call-in number, but we do have a chat room. And if you're listening live, if you're watching live, be sure to say something in the chat. Not only is it good for the algorithm for this episode to get it out there, but also because I pay attention. I'm watching both chat rooms on Rumble and on YouTube. I will respond. And as Silvermine said with the most recent chat in YouTube, at YouTube, hit the like button and leave an extra comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. Be involved. If you like the information I put out there, if you're like, wow, this stuff needs to be out there, share it. Follow, subscribe, whatever the button is. We should be on something like Newsmax, Fox, Newsmax, One America News, America's Voice, something. But we'll start here for a while, now that we're online and no longer on AM/FM radio. And once again, as I said at the beginning of the show, I've been on AM/FM. A lot of people don't realize I've been on AM/FM radio for 15 years. August 6th, next month, what, 3-4 weeks away, honey? Looking over at my wife here. That was going to be my 15-year anniversary on AM/FM radio. I ended being on FM radio less than a month short of 15-year anniversary. Now, I'd love to get back on AM/FM radio. If there are stations out there that say, hey, Doug, we'll have you. Well, I'll talk. But the funding, the advertising, didn't have enough advertising. My main advertiser, All-Star Collision, which had been with me since 2012, he's retiring. Asgard Energy, been with me for a few years. Put money into both locations, the LA County, Riverside County area, and San Diego County area. Because of certain changes in subsidies and things like that, had to reorganize his advertising dollars. And we no longer had income coming in from the Constitution classes we used to do in Southern California. So the funding went bye-bye, and so does the AM/FM radio shows. But here we are. And now and what a critical time for this show to grow. We are under attack. We are under an invasion from within, too. They call themselves Democratic Socialist of America, DSA, self-proclaimed socialists. They were the driving force behind Rashida the Mustache Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, all out crazy, and the campaigns of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani and Los Angeles mayoral candidate Nithya Raman, senatorial candidate Graham Plattner of Maine, Chris Rabb, running for Pennsylvania's 3rd congressional district, Malat Kiros in Colorado's 1st congressional district, Jerry-Eliza Avila Chevalier in New York, Claire Valdez in New York, Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan, Oliver Larkin in Florida, just to name a few. And the reality is, this is nothing new. This has been going on for a long time, but now we see it more because it's bigger than it's ever been, or at least bigger than it's been in a while. I'd say during the 60s, 70s, it might have gotten this big. But see, this time, these revolutionaries, these anti-American, communist, socialist, anti-capitalist, want to destroy the American Constitution group, they believe that their revolution has a chance to topple the U.S. Constitution. And that's what it's all about. They want to destroy the system established under our United States Constitution. We can go back to some history, right? We got the Fabians. The British Fabian Society, founded in 1884, decided that the way to progress towards socialism, rather than a violent revolution, as called for by people like Karl Marx, was a gradual, creeping, incremental version. Creeping incrementalism is what I've called it. So the Fabians became a major force in promoting British collectivism that eventually extended to America. Fabian socialism was characterized as being a more strategic approach of implementing change. The socialist policies were disguised as beneficial policies rather than overt revolutionary measures. That's how you do it, right? I mean, you've heard the saying, Satan doesn't appear as Satan, he appears as an angel of light. That's the old saying, right? It comes from the Bible. This is what they do. This is what they're about. You know, one of my favorite quotes regarding this is C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis is my favorite Christian writer of all time. C.S. Lewis was brilliant. Here's what he said. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. Lays it out nicely. That's exactly what we're up against. They claim to be for the common good. And, you know, communism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, it's easy to sell. Hey, you want a bunch of free stuff? Hey, yeah, vote for me. I mean, that's pretty much all it is. But it's like President Trump and who was it? I want to say it was Rubio, I think it was. Says maybe Vance is, you know, what happens is you get a bunch of communists, they take over, and then and at first it seems like it's wonderful, and everybody's getting their free this, free that, and then eventually it all catches up to them, and then you get a room full of communists sitting around a table, hungry, poor, many of their comrades dead, looking at each other going, huh, what happened? The approach is attractive, or at least the approach by the Fabians was attractive to what they consider to be, and what we may even consider to be, reasonable people with moderate viewpoints. Oh, well, you know, I believe in helping out my fellow man, so let government do this. And if you disagree, oh, you don't want to help anybody. And that's not so. I'm very charitable. I believe in voluntary charity work and expenditures. I believe the church should be involved in the public square. I think we should be looking out for each other and our community, but not through government. But they try to appeal to these reasonable people with moderate viewpoints. And what they do is they create what they've been doing. The Fabians is creating this system of slow and careful normalization of socialist policies that gave them a staying power that revolutionary communism lacked. Now, in America, the Fabians began infiltrating during the 1890s. American-born Fabians, European immigrants, and they established these organizations promoting these gradualist ideas. But what it became is the frog in the pot scheme. You know, where the heat is turned up so gradually, the frog doesn't realize it's being boiled alive until it's too late. President Woodrow Wilson's closest advisor, Colonel Edward Mandell House, was a Fabian Society member. And like Wilson, he regarded the U.S. Constitution as outmoded and grotesque. The Fabians recognized that America's Constitution was capitalism's strongest safeguard. As British socialist Harold Lasky noted, constitutional constraints, state oversight in the Senate, bottom-up governance, that presented significant barriers to implementing socialist policies in America. During the Progressive Era, which is basically from 1890 to 1920, about a 30-year period, maybe a little bit longer if you consider it starting in the 1880s, the Socialist Party was founded in America, 1901, and the Soviet communists began their infiltration into American institutions. European socialists poured into the United States after the liberal revolutions of 1848 were suppressed. So in other words, socialism was already hitting us before the war between the states. German Social Democrats founded the Socialist Labor Party in 1877. Christian socialism spread during the dawn of the Progressive Era. Edward Bellamy's Fabian utopian tale Looking Backward in 1888 gained much of its fame through Christian socialist clergy. His cousin, Francis Bellamy, wrote the original Pledge of Allegiance to inspire a national oath, which changed to a uniting oath that later added under God. Socialist Party achieved significant electoral success about that time. Eugene V. Debs, for those of you who are history buffs, you've heard of Debs, won 6% of the popular vote in the 1912 presidential election. He decided, though, that he and his cohorts decided after the 40s they didn't need to run for president and for office anymore because they had a vehicle, the Democratic Party. In the 1930s, the Communist Party of the United States of America, CPUSA, began playing a substantial role in labor and racial struggles. The economic upheaval of the Great Depression produced fertile ground for socialism, communism. They're both the same. Socialism is the means to get to communism. Technically, communism has never truly been achieved. We use the word communist for like really bad socialism, but they're really the same thing. And the Great Depression created fertile ground for that mindset to gain traction because, people, they're out of work. They're getting desperate, right? Disaffected workers, intellectuals, they're buying into it. The Fabian strategy of gradual infiltration remained in place as socialists focused on influencing policy from within institutions rather than through overt revolutionary activity. So they got into academia. They got into the entertainment industry. They got themselves into the media and the news media and the papers. And then all of these ideas infiltrating into our institutions. Infiltration. It did begin to influence policy. They permeated the New Deal programs by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as well as many other government initiatives. They just made sure they weren't labeled socialist because nobody would buy it if they knew it was socialist. So they named it something else, sort of like Hamilton. Remember I was talking about Hamilton was Federalist Party. He had a nationalist party that believed in big government and usurping the Constitution, but he could not have won anything. John Adams would not won the presidency if they said that's what our party is. So they disguised it. They didn't use the word nationalist. They didn't use the word usurp. They didn't use the words that would alert people. They attacked Jefferson. They had Jefferson derangement syndrome. And then they claimed to be the Federalist Party. It's all about federalism, Constitution. They lied. Just like these socialists have been lying. They don't use the word socialist. They want you to know they're socialists. Oh, it's for the common good. We're looking out for you. We're exercising our policies for the good of you. Go back to C.S. Lewis. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. The infiltration did not go unseen. In the 50s, intense opposition to socialist and communist movements in the country arose. With the infiltration in place in media and entertainment and academia and many political circles, McCarthyism, the Second Red Scare, 1950, 1956, became labeled as radical and unwarranted because they had their hands in the cookie jar when it came to information. By the mid-1950s, though, dozens of Communist Party leaders were imprisoned under the Smith Act. Thousands of rank-and-file communists were being investigated by the FBI. It was a good time. McCarthy was right, as some people like to say, although he wasn't really the leader as much as other people. He's the one that got the name stuck with. But anyway, so these communists began standing before congressional investigating committees. They were denied passports. Many instances, they were lost their jobs and were sent out of the country. Under scrutiny, membership in the Socialist Party dropped drastically to less than 2,000 members. Remember that number. Socialist Party, less than 2,000 members. Remember that number when I bring up how many people are now part of the Democratic Socialists of America. Now, by the end of the 1950s, the Communist and Socialist parties virtually disappeared from the scene. The Cold War, McCarthyism, House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC. An increase in access to information led to a dominance of American values. Despite the setbacks, the Communist Party survived, regrouped, planned new strategies. They're sort of like Islam. They just kind of crawl out of sight for a little while, build again, and then they hit you again. That's what they do. In 1959, former President Harry S. Truman denounced the House Un-American Activities Committee, Democrat. Denounced it as the most un-American thing in the country today. What's un-American to go after someone for having an opinion different than yours? This is true in a sense. One of the wonderful things about America is freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, absolutely. But when the enemy is invading, using those rights against us and claiming that's all they're doing, and they are committing insurrection against us from within, it's time for government to oust that threat. Article 4, Section 4 guarantees every state a Republican form of government. The federal government is tasked with addressing these invasions. The Red Scare was gone. The 1960s began marching toward a new socialist period of agitation, and the committee became a target of political satirists and the defiance of a new generation of political activists because, see, we like to rebel. That's part of human nature. And what's happening now is they're rebelling against the Democratic establishment. It's not radical enough for them. That's what was happening in the 60s, too. Socialism rose from the grave during the 1960s with widespread radicalization brought by the New Left, similar movements that use social struggles to fuel their revolts. The Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, came to the forefront of the American leftist activist political scene in 1965, providing a new organizational framework for radical activism. Numerous socialist movements rose and fell, vying for position, giving birth to liberation movements that changed tactics, using new social movements as their vessel, incorporating socialist principles in the culture, even though they weren't explicitly identified as such. And as the 60s and 70s gave way to the Reagan Revolution, socialist ideas fought back against Reagan-era patriotism. They sought to continue to influence American society through multiple channels, many of those collectivist ideas becoming not only mainstream, but a perceived integral part of American society. Safety net programs. So, Doug, so you're against safety net? No. I'm against it from a federal standpoint. Federal government has no business doing this. If a state wants to have what it thinks is one of those programs, go for it. They have less money to throw into it, and it's closer to the controlling mechanism to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. And all the states aren't affected. Other states can watch and go, well, that didn't work, or that did work. Here's how we can do it better, or here's why we're not going to do it at all. That's the point of the Constitution, is for the states to be laboratories. For the states then to watch each other, influence each other, and for a bad idea not to become nationwide. If a state has a bad idea and it goes south, the rest of the states go, whoa, I ain't doing that. But see, the left, the tyranny, the socialists, the communists, they need it at a national level. And that's what they've been doing. And this gradualist approach that got launched by the Fabians was becoming very effective in the 60s and 70s. Socialist principles were being incorporated into mainstream policies without over-identification as socialist. And after more than 100 years of Fabian strategy working through existing institutions, organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, formed in 1920 by Fabians, rose to prominence. Did you know that? Did you know the ACLU was created by Fabian socialists? Today, they're promoters of leftist traditional activism, and they actively combat the arrest and deportation of communists. Socialist ideas persist and are on the rise again. I feel like we are right smack in the middle of the turbulent legacy of the 1960s again. But instead of hippies, it's a bunch of blue-haired, green-haired, purple-haired, 4 pounds of face jewelry people pushing these same stupid socialist ideas, seeking to transform the world economy, seeking to transform American ideals to something that was never intended to be. And now the greatest influences come from the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. And it was just once a fringe movement. In fact, in 2016, it was considered fringe, and Bernie Sanders had a connection. So what did the Democratic Party do? They got in the way of Bernie, pushed him aside to make sure Hillary got the... Because they were not going to let the fringe take over. Now, it's a driving force. It's the new Democratic Party power broker, the DSA is. It was founded in 1982, back when I was a young man, through the merger of the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, the New American Movement, NAM, N-A-M, two organizations founded here in the early 70s. The founder of NAM, Michael Harrington, was the author of The Other America in 1962. And then he emerged after, and his organization emerged after splitting from the Socialist Party, using connections within the labor movement and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party to gain traction. Early on, the DSA focused more on activism. They weren't interested in holding office in the beginning. It was about being agitators. It was about being community organizers. It was about creating the chaos in the streets. They prioritized social justice causes. Remained an activist group until about 2014, when they aligned with Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders told them, hey, you guys have been doing well, but now let's do it through the system. Let's infiltrate politics. And so the group made it its number one priority to support Sanders running for president in the 2016 presidential election, and he was an outlier. He was a fringe candidate. No one was taking him seriously, we were told. Then the organization continued to grow. They had Sanders' presidential campaign to help their growth, bringing democratic socialism, is what they call it. It's communism, is what it is. Just call it what it is, into mainstream political discourse. Then in 2018, the DSA achieved victories through the elections of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, and Rashida Tlaib to the United States Congress, followed by Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman in 2020, although they didn't hang in there. They were gone after that. But these victories demonstrated that the Democratic Socialists of America could win, even against establishment Democrats, inspiring a whole new generation of activists and candidates. The DSA evolved from a small group of activists to a growing force in the Democratic Party, with the transformation accelerating dramatically after the 2024 election, when the group broke with the establishment of the Democratic Party by refusing to endorse Joe Biden or Kamala in the presidential election. And now, in 2026, remember what I said? Remember what I told you? The Socialist Party got below 2,000? The Democratic Socialists of America, their number of members is now a high enough number to make them the second largest socialist organization in American history. Only the Socialist Party of America at one point during its history was bigger than the DSA is now. What's that number? Democratic Socialists of America, they have surpassed 100,000 members. They have emerged as a dominant force in Democratic politics. They are on pace to field the largest congressional delegation in its history after several members won their primaries against establishment Democrats. In New York, 9 out of 10 candidates backed by the DSA secured victories in the state's Democratic primary elections. So ran Mom Donnie, right? He's their poster child. He's the leader of the party at this point, it seems like. And when people are saying, well, when he first got elected, they say, well, that's just happening in New York City. No, it's spreading. He made history in November 2025 by becoming New York's first immigrant Muslim DSA member mayor. The DSA spent years building influence inside the Democratic Party by recruiting candidates, building a campaign infrastructure, embedding operatives inside races stretching far beyond heavily progressive areas where the movement first began to bubble into notoriety. As time has passed, their strategic approach has made it difficult for Democrats to ignore them. After the loss to Donald Trump in 2024, the stumbling Democratic Party was ripe for a takeover from within. And now we are seeing Democratic voters gravitating toward DSA candidates they perceive to be authentic and anti-establishment. I've been hearing this comparison of the Tea Party. I'll get to that in a bit. This is not the Democratic Party's Tea Party. The Tea Party was making the party better. They were trying to get the country closer to the Constitution. And the DSA activists, they said, well, we're committed to democracy. Well, first of all, read my book, Repeal Democracy. We're not a democracy. We're not intended to be a democracy. We're becoming one, it seems. I don't want to save democracy. I want to save the republic. Democracy plays a small part in that. And we got to remember that Marxism has always believed that pure democracy is the road to socialism, which is precisely why the Founding Fathers created a republic. Utopianism was the socialism of their day. The Founding Fathers understood socialism. They knew what communism was. It wasn't called those names. I can't count how many people say, yeah, but the Founding Fathers didn't see this coming. Yeah, they did. You think Karl Marx was coming up with something new? He was rehashing something that's reappeared numerous times throughout history. Utopianism is what they called it. Collectivism, communitarianism. And the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution to not only guard against monarchism, but any collectivist invasion that might fester within, like utopianism / socialism / communism. Democracy is not a value the socialists really care about. It is a vessel for them to gain power. Democracy goes out the window once they have the power. And as with all communist movements in history, once in full power, the socialists in America will eliminate any opposing parties, eliminate any democratic functions, mutating elections into highly controlled formalities, and take out any rebels, including the very activists that assisted in their ascendance to power. Because, see, they don't want rebels. The rebels, the agitators, the activists that get them there, once they're there, they get rid of those people. Because those people will fight for change. They don't want anybody fighting for change once they're in power. This is what the Soviet Union did. This is what China did. This is what North Korea did. This is what Cambodia did. This is what Venezuela did. This is what Cuba did. If you are part of the resistance to get them there, you're gone. If you are intelligent, you are part of the educational system, you have half a brain there so you can think beyond what they want you to think, you're gone. The organization's growing influence should have Americans concerned. They have 100,000 members, more than 150 chapters, over 200 elected officials spanning every level of government. The DSA are a formidable force in American politics. This is not just small Johnny-come-lately organization. And the truth is, the rise of the DSA does illustrate a growing disillusionment with traditional politics, particularly among younger Americans who are fresh out of the education meat grinder. They've been convinced not to believe their eyes and ears. And that's the magic of what these people do. Don't believe your eyes and ears. I mean, you saw the reports on the Smithsonian, right? The Smithsonian Institute. Don't believe your eyes and ears. America is horrible. Here, let us show you. Yeah, but I'm not living bad. Oh, but don't believe your eyes. It's like COVID. I wore no mask. I got no shot. I never got COVID. But don't believe your eyes and ears from those people. It's going on. They wanted you to be convinced because of what they told you. They want you to be convinced not to believe your eyes and ears. America isn't great. They want you to believe that. Yeah, but I have a good job. Yeah, but don't believe it. No, there's a lot of people who don't. It's flawed. I like mine. Cops are out to kill everybody. Got to defund the police. But I don't have a problem with it. Don't believe your eyes and ears. That's what they do. They believe America is not great because of what they were told. They have been disaffected with what they perceive to be corrupt and cynical politics, even though their eyes and ears don't see it, only what they're being told. They've been instructed. I'm talking about these young socialists now coming out of the meat grinder called the educational system. They've been instructed to be involved, to knock on doors, to attend rallies, to be a part of a growing revolution. They seek change to the electoral system. They push for universal health care. They push for universal health care. They push for no borders. After all, it's like a John Lennon song, Imagine, on steroids. Brotherhood of man. No religion, no countries, no possessions. So they push for no borders. They push for government housing. They push for government transportation. And as the Democratic Socialists of Americas grow, as that organization grows, its true positions are really beginning to emerge. Even the average person, the media can't even hide what they're really about anymore. The fact is, they are about a lack of virtue. Only a virtuous society can be permanently a free society. Only a virtuous people can be permanently a free people. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. That's Benjamin Franklin. He understood this. He saw this coming. So you got this lack of virtue, this anti-Semitism, politically toxic ideas, positions that are providing setbacks. You have the establishment of the Democratic Party not fighting against it, and they're beating those candidates. The Democratic Socialists are building momentum. And the Democratic Socialists of America continue to expand its presence in the Democratic Party in ways that we don't even realize. Its influence on American politics seems to be growing even further in the coming years, I think. This is not to say that I think all is lost. I never believe that. If for those of you who know me, I'm an optimistic guy. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to point out the dangers that are going on. And we have to ask ourselves, so the DSA has created their own paramilitary group. A lot of people don't know this, Red Rabbits. They're calling for abolishing the carceral forces of the capitalist state, quote unquote, defunding the Department of War, instituting amnesty for all migrants to this country, replacing the president of the Supreme Court with an executive and judiciary chosen by and subordinate to Congress. For God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee. They want to rule by committee through the Congress. Till they get enough power, then they'll have their dictator rise up. Are we willing to be involved in our own right to stop the spread of this poison in America? As they call for real democracy, true democracy, pure democracy, which is fascist call for governmental control, the abolition of law enforcement, or at least local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, until finally they have their military forces administering their version of the law once they grab the levers of power. They want to defund the police. They want to get rid of law enforcement, replace it with a bunch of social workers. You think that system's going to stay in place once they think they have power? No. They want to end any restrictions on marriage. Polygamy, here they come. Of course, once again, they'll destroy that once they're in power. Are we strong enough in our belief system, as traditional Americans, in the U.S. Constitution, in the principles laid out by those founding fathers, by the ideas of natural rights, God-given rights? Are we strong enough to stand behind that? Are we strong enough in our belief in the free market and the rule of law? And that God has his hand on this? Are we willing to defend those important principles? President Trump calls this rise of communism the biggest threat against America since our founding. He said, quote, because it's not socialism, it's really communism. That's what I was saying earlier, right? They use the word, this is Trump, they use the word social democrat because it sounds so nice. But it's really communism you're talking about. I think it's the biggest threat to our nation there is, maybe since our founding. That includes World War I, World War II, September 11th. It includes the Pearl Harbor attack. I think this is the biggest threat to our nation. There's never been anything so dangerous. President Trump's resilience strategy, look it up. Go to the whitehouse.gov, pull up President Trump's resilience strategy. It goes way beyond crisis management. It's designed to proactively challenge the threat, preserve American interests, preserve American prosperity, deter our adversaries. And as the globalist progressive movement sputters, the socialists are focusing more greatly on America because, see, they've realized, see, the left, the progressive socialist communists have been the globalists. They've been working all around the world. They were going to do it with or without us. Then they're realizing they can't do it as long as we are still who we are. And President Trump is saying, hey, we are who we are, and I'm going to make sure it stays that way. And they're freaking out. They don't know what to do. As long as the United States remains committed to our traditional system of liberty, free market principles, godly foundation, we serve as a threat to their plans. So the communists and political Islam have joined forces, and America is their target. And despite their vast differences, the two movements have aligned against Western thought, capitalism, liberty. Why? Because those things stand in the way of their ideologies. And because they have the same enemies: God, Christians and Israel, American liberty, and the free market. And the Democrats don't care how dangerous the DSA is, just as long as they can use the movement to return to power. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker called the DSA primary victories, quote, the recipe for winning 2026 and beyond. The recipe, however, is ultimately calling for a rewriting of the Constitution itself. They won't tell you this, and maybe they don't acknowledge this. Maybe they don't understand that's what is taking over their party. Or maybe they do. Maybe all along these Democrats have wanted to rewrite the Constitution. They just weren't willing to say it out loud. So here comes the DSA to verbalize what they've been thinking. But in the end, they all want to simply remake America. And I know that the leftist media is getting upset. Oh, they use the word communist, because they don't know what to do and they don't know how to handle it. So they're coming out with these name calling. No, they're communists. They are communists. I know what communism is. And their movement is our modern day Bolsheviks. And let's understand something. The creation of the Soviet Union after the Russian Revolution, it wasn't some big, we hear Russian Revolution, Soviet, and we think about this big revolution with a majority of Russians demanding change and shots fired and all that. The Bolsheviks were roughly between 5 and 7% of the population. But they changed the country. They took their nation down a communist path that would kill over 100 million people and take nearly a century to dismantle. Today's Democratic Socialists of America, like the Bolsheviks, support a hard socialist agenda that calls for dismantling the system, packing the federal court system, destroying the Electoral College, ending the filibuster, defunding local law enforcement, altering electoral practices. They are demanding an end to America's traditional friendship with Israel, aligning with Islam, restoring global redistribution of wealth tactics like the USAID, like climate change tactics, all that. They're calling for the government takeover of housing and utilities. They're targeting expropriation of private property, new punitive taxes on net worth and unrealized capital gains, nationalizing the airlines, nationalizing all healthcare, childcare, grocery stores, transportation. They are calling for free college, canceling all student loans, federal acquisition of private lands and freezing rent. The new communists wish to take actions they believe will stop, quote unquote, white privilege, and then give compensation to the victims of alleged white privilege. They seek the institutionalization of radical identity politics and racial, ethnic, sexual orientation chauvinism. It's the third world idea of anti-colonialism and the oppressor-oppressed theory. And the communists rising in America are pledging solidarity with socialist communist movements around the world, despising Western civilization in general and the U.S. in particular. And in short, President Trump's belief that this is the greatest threat since America's founding is exactly correct. And only a counter-revolution of ideas, processes, and a return to the foundational ideas of the Constitution, like petitioning the government for redress of grievances. I'm going to talk about that next week on this program. Committees of correspondence, being fully involved politically by those who cherish the original intent of the U.S. Constitution can stop this. This is not a minor threat. We need to take this seriously. We need to make moves to squash it now. Remember what Ronald Reagan said? You and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our grandchildren's children what it once was like in America when men were free. After all, he also said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. And understand, these people, they're all about going after our property, our private property. This is a part of what they're about, the means of production. This is what it's about. The Democrats in the past have said, okay, well, we believe in soft socialism, but we don't want government controlling the means of production. We want people to still be able to own their home, own their car. These people from DS, that's not what, They adhere to the fundamental aspects of the communist ideology. And that's what we're up against here. The communist critique of private property that we're seeing from these DSA knuckleheads Kowanowski drive-by unique chat. Yeah, Rumble. I'm not sure what you mean by that. The communist critique of private property targets the means of production and any assets that generate wealth or symbols of wealth. According to Marxist theory, when these means of production, means of wealth generation, or signs of wealth are privately owned, they create a class system where owners, bourgeoisie, profit from the labor of workers, proletariat. Communism teaches that private property ownership allows the wealthy to create value through the labor of workers, while the laborers only receive a portion of that value in wages. This, according to Karl Marx, alienates workers from their labor, dividing them from their humanity. Thus, the inequality gap widens, leading to class division, social conflict. Karl Marx viewed private property as a historical development that served a purpose that would eventually be superseded by collective ownership as the communist society advances. And as with any system, it is about pushing the envelope. And the envelope is pushed, and the dynamics become more extreme. What did the Democrats think were going to happen when they were doing quote-unquote soft socialism? The envelope always gets pushed. A friend of mine, Bob, used to know when I lived down in the Temecula area in Southern California, told me that he visited Moscow, Soviet Union in 1972, I think it was. And he observed that there was no curtains on any of the windows of the apartments or other living spaces. So he asked about it. And he was told that the rule was necessary so that nobody could hide any illegal access or excess, I mean. So in other words, if you had anything that showed that you might do it a little bit better, you have more than someone else, whatever, it would be on display because you have no windows. It would be known. It was a way of keeping everybody, quote unquote, honest and equal. Soviet Russia argued that any visible displays of any wealth must be discouraged because they represented the capitalist values that communism sought to replace. The absence of curtains also symbolized a rejection of privacy in favor of communal transparency. Remember, in socialist systems, the community's interests outweigh individual desires or concerns. In the end, the no curtains policy made it difficult for individuals to accumulate goods beyond, what was considered appropriate for everyone. It is worth noting that party elites enjoyed privileges and possessions unavailable to ordinary citizens. While the communist vision of property relations aims to create a society where the means of production are collectively owned and controlled, eliminating class divisions and allowing for equitable distribution of goods and services based on need rather than purchasing power, that same dynamic never applies to those in charge. Communism's anti-possession principles are fundamentally flawed for a number of key reasons, but one of them is it doesn't apply to the leaders. Communism's a wonderful thing for those in charge. And the founding fathers recognized the importance of our natural rights. And the fact that they are among our private and personal possessions. In other words, your natural rights are God-given to you. You possess your rights. It says secure the blessings of liberty in the preamble. Why? To secure them in your possession. They are yours. Your rights are a possession. If there is a system that disallows possessions, then you have no rights. The Declaration of Independence establishes that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The right to own property is deeply intertwined with these natural rights. When individuals cannot possess the fruits of their labors, their liberty is compromised and their ability to pursue happiness is severely constrained. If one may not possess property, not only is their pursuit of happiness obstructed, but then that means they can't own their own God-given rights either. If one does not own one's own rights, what does that mean? It means they are possessed by government, defined by government, provided by government as government determines. In a society where there is no possession, you have no rights, and they own your rights, and they then ration your rights out to you as they determine is fit. And that's what happens with everything in a communist society, be it healthcare, private, place to live, food, whatever. It becomes rationed. In short, while property rights begins with the ownership of physical property and is considered a natural right, if government may confiscate and possess tangible property, then government will ultimately take possession of all property, and that includes your personal blessings of liberty. Communist anti-property principles have led to severe historical consequences every time these principles have been applied. Every nation that has implemented anti-property principles has experienced economic disaster. Every one of them. I don't care who you are out there. You cannot name one socialist communist system that eliminated property, personal ownership of property, that somehow pulled off economic windfall. The Soviet Union, Eastern Bloc countries, China, or at least the impact, I will say, has been reduced since its market reforms infused limited capitalistic principles into its system. Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela. They all suffered from massive shortages, declining productivity, technological stagnation, lack of innovation, once private property was abolished. And as the founding fathers realized, the ownership of private property is a key foundational necessity for a system to flourish and become prosperous. Ultimately, the elimination of private property leads to massive state power. When the state controls all means of production, distribution, ownership of property, it gains total control over the lives of its citizens. My friend's observation of no curtains in Moscow illustrates this. Without property rights, there is no meaningful barrier between the individual and state power. The consequences of it all includes the deaths of over 100 million people through starvation, purges, labor camps, direct execution. The Holodomor in Ukraine, man-made famine created by Stalin. The Great Leap Forward in China, 1958, 1962. This was a Mao-led rapid transformation of China from an agrarian society to industrialization that resulted in catastrophic economic mismanagement and the Great Chinese Famine and the killing fields in Cambodia. These were all direct consequences of implementing these anti-property principles. And while communists claim they aim to protect the environment, communist states have the worst environmental records in human history. Without property rights, the incentive to innovate and improve disappears. Communist countries historically lag behind capitalist countries in technological advancement, scientific discovery, quality of life improvements. Communist thinking misunderstands human nature. They are convinced that the goodness of people can support their ideology and that human nature can be reshaped by ideology. People are motivated by self-interest, family concern, following a moral path as laid out by their creator, and a desire to leave a better world for their children. All of these things are directly or indirectly related to the and expressed through acquiring and protecting property. This is why our Constitution and our founding fathers were so focused on property rights. When these natural motivations are suppressed, society becomes nothing more. It becomes, should I say, it doesn't become more egalitarian. Society becomes more brutal, as history has repeatedly demonstrated. The American constitutional system, by contrast, was designed to secure property rights precisely because the founding fathers understood that ownership creates a natural check on government power and provides the foundation for a free and prosperous society. This is a large part of why the policies being advanced by the Democratic Socialist candidates are so concerning. It isn't only festering in New York City. LA County is working to seize private property on the West Coast. The Community Opportunity Purchase Act, which is basically a seizure of property, circumventing any constitutional protections, and then giving it to their political allies. The move in Los Angeles County undermines the contract clause of the Constitution as well by interfering with a private party's ability to freely enter into contracts for the sale of the property, while also representing an unequal application of the law in violation of the 14th Amendment that favors politically connected groups over ordinary citizens. Then we got the recent deadly earthquakes in Venezuela. It revealed the stark reality regarding the flaws of anti-property principles in communist systems. Buildings constructed when Hugo Chavez's great housing mission was going on were little more than facades held together by styrofoam and thin concrete shells. When the earthquake struck, it all collapsed, killing over 1,400 people with tens of thousands still missing. This wasn't some accident. It's a predictable result of a system that values political loyalty over competence, central planning over expertise, propaganda over safety. The Venezuelan government rushed construction projects to meet political quotas while ignoring seismic codes and basic engineering standards. This is what happens when the state eliminates private enterprise, which provides accountability through market mechanisms and property rights. So what we're seeing in America in this is the early stage of the same ideological path that led to the collapse of every communist society. These policies are championed by people like the Democratic Socialists of America as fair, equitable, and reasonable policies for helping the poor and the homeless, but ultimately leads to the erosion of property rights, a concentration of power, a degradation of quality and safety, the creation of a permanent underclass dependent upon government, and the eventual collapse of the economic system. The Founding Fathers understood that property rights are not merely about protecting wealth. They are about securing liberty. When the state is able to seize property, it can control your behavior. When the state controls the means of production, it controls your life. This is why the Constitution contains explicit language regarding property rights and why any attempt to undermine these principles should be viewed as an attack on the very foundations of our republic. Even if used in the name of the common good, history demonstrates that whether it's through overnight seizure or through regulatory schemes that effectively transfers property to political allies, the result is the same: the concentration of power in the hands of a few and the erosion of freedom for everyone else. I have a new book out, The Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump. Check it out. Go to Amazon.com, look up Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump, or just go to navigation2liberty.com. The link is in below here, below the video in the summary area. Go to my list of books, new book, the link's there. Go buy it, Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump. When you buy it, make sure that you then give it a grade later. You go back to Amazon and say, oh, I'm going to give it 5 stars because that helps get it higher up on the list for other people to notice the book. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Thanks for spending the time with me. Hopefully next week I'll have Alan, I'll have Dennis with me, and maybe I'll have Warhamster too. We'll see. This has been the first episode of Constitution Radio on Rumble and YouTube, now that we're no longer on AM/FM radio. And I had fun. Hopefully you did too. Leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you would like me to talk about. Is there a constitutional issue you would like me to address? Leave it in the comment section, or just go to DouglasVGibbs.com. Right there, see, DouglasVGibbs.com. Hit Ask Doug. There's a link in the link bar that says Ask Doug. Type what you want. I will respond, and if it's a request for the show, I may very well talk about it right here on Constitution Radio, on the Mr. Constitution Hour on Thursdays, or my other shows on Patriot Soapbox, or wherever else I am. I've got some interviews on other shows coming up. If you want to be on my email list so that you know about them, go to DouglasVGibbs.com, scroll down, join the email list. Until next time, be safe. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye now.